So now that we have the table in place, the T body, right? Isn't that the last one? It's been a day since I've worked on this, so I have to remind myself. Rendering the action buttons, right? So in this case, we just figured out the code to have rendered the buttons into the row. So now what you want to think about is what we're going to do next is we're going to work on these buttons, right? So we have them here, but they don't do anything. There's no event listener on them. And then we have to talk about, in this case, how do we actually edit the data that was given us, and then how do we delete it? And we're going to kind of do it, and I'm going to use this term, we're going to hack it a little bit and make it a little more, like give you a quick process, like relatively, and when you see the code and we explain it, it'll make sense. Easy way to do it. But then as we gain more experience, we're going to add a bit more interesting functionality here, because what we're going to do is not really great practice, but when we're learning, sometimes that's what happens. You'll see as we get there. So let's start with thinking about these buttons and realizing we're going to have to write some code for them. We know we had some code that renders them, so I would start with creating a function that first renders them, and then we'll start writing the event listener for them. So I'd come up here and I'd say function and write a new function just for the render TBL BTNs. Okay. All right, so now I have my function set up. And yeah, we could drop the render since render is the name of the file, but I still think it's a little more readable. I don't know. Okay, so now I'm back down here. So here we're setting up the TD, then we're creating the buttons, then we're editing the text to edit and delete, and then we're attaching them into the TD, and then we're attaching them into the row. So what I'd start here is I would just copy all this, or actually let's just cut it for now. Come over here, and by the way, if you're flush against when you paste, it should keep that same formatting. I don't know why I didn't see that before when I was trying to clean up my code. So now we have to go, okay, I'm creating the TD, okay, then I'm appending it. So what does, anytime you do this kind of work, you have to ask, what does my function need? Which would be its inputs, which would be its arguments, okay? So arguments parameters, it'd be its parameter. Right, so when we call it, the argument we pass, so we're going to call render table buttons. Right, we're going to call that. And are we going to need anything passed to it? And are we going to need anything returned from it, is what you want to think about. Well, when I look in here, these are all set up. There's really nothing that I need. Okay, so there's no parameter I need. So, but what do I need to return is I need to return the column. So if I'm returning the column, then I have to here declare the column, the TD. So make sure when and you do want to not have your functions be doing a lot of work. You want to have them be logically organized into the functionality that they are providing. Sometimes we mix and mingle and we get long functions, but generally we can break them up and do some of this refactoring to where you can easily say, hey, if I want to look at the headings, that's it. If I want to look at the buttons rendering, that's there. Okay, if I want to look at, I must have already done this before. Oh, actually that one was wrong, so let's actually get rid of that one. I forgot to do it from my last playing. Okay, so now let's test it. Okay, first, last, one, here. Oh, good, it worked. First, last, two, here. Good, it worked, which is awesome, right? Remember again, this is volatile data, which can be kind of frustrating when you're testing your code because you have to re-enter it every time. I think we'll see next week if we get to local storage. I'm hoping to get the app that we're creating here, this carbon footprint, to a point to where it'll be what you'll end up doing when you do your development work. Okay, so now that we've done that, we've got that done. Now we want to think about, right, What we need to add, we need to add an event listener. Well, the only time we've done event listeners so far is over on main, right? Where we had it, our form event listener, okay, that was setting on the form. So event listeners, as we've introduced them, you've only seen them on an actual form, but you can put event listeners on an input field. You can put event listeners on a button. There's many ways. You can put it just on the page itself. So we've just shown you one, at this point, way to implement an event listener. No, there are many, which is why I recommend just perusing the MDN for add event listener. So on our render function, where would we do this? Well, we could do it anywhere before we attach it to the row or to the TD. Okay, so we could do it here, right? So we could say, in this case, let's do btn del dot add event listener. Okay, now what would we want to listen for is a click. And what do we want to do? Generally, we look for the event. Okay. The reason I can reference, right, the button I've created here, even before I attach it into the body, is I'm building up the DOM itself. Again, remember, it doesn't get actually updated to, we're building DOM elements, but it's not until here that we only update the actual rendered DOM once, but the DOM that's setting in volatile memory, we can update many times, and it's a better practice to do that, but only update the actual rendered DOM once because it's just slower. Okay, so now that we do this, and I put it on the delete, right? How could we test to see if it's working? Right? Hello from inside the delete button. Okay. We could also look at the event itself. Okay. All right, so let's see now. Let's see if that works. Good. It does work. Okay. So given that it works now, well, it renders. We know that, did that before, but now how do we see if it actually is listening for something? And here's how we know is when we click it, it says hello from inside, right? So that event listener is sitting there, okay, waiting. I was going to show you too. Where is that? I looked for it before. I remember not finding it, and I said I was going to go find it, and I haven't. There is a way to see all the event listeners on your page. Oh, I got to go find that. It's not the event listener breakpoints, but there is a way just to see them. But in this case, we know we have now 1, 2, 3 event listeners on the page. But there's a way in DevTools to actually look at them. Might be there somewhere in there. Okay. So now that we have this, now let's think about what code do we need to do, right? So what do we need to do to actually handle this in the way that it makes sense? Like, how do we edit the data here? And how do we delete that data? Which do you think would be easier? The edit or the delete? Okay? And what would we need, right? So what would we need inside of here to actually edit and delete? Now keep in mind, event listeners are, right, asynchronous code. Asynchronous code means all of our references. If I put a breakpoint here, okay, if I put a breakpoint here, right, it won't be until I actually hit here, right? At this point, the page is loaded, the global context is gone. In a sense, it's not completely gone though, because like I can't come down here even on the render, right? Data gone. The console says I don't know what that is. Now when I hit delete here, right? Data's still gone. But I'm inside of here, right? So could I look at anything above it? No, I can't, because this code, right, is the only thing running. So whatever it's going to need to actually delete, we have to pass to it. Okay, so what do we need to know about the delete, which is the easier one, right? And you could start with either asking chat how to delete an item in array, JavaScript, JS. Okay, so if you want to remove an item from an array, you can use pop, right? To remove the last one, or you can use shift, right? So there's two ways right there we can do it. Okay, so we could go look at the information there and see free code camp has one on it, right? How to delete an item in the array. Pop, shift. The method I would use would be splice. Okay, because the splice actually allows you to specify multiple arguments. Okay, let me show you this. Let's go to this. Is the one I wanted. I actually provide you a link to this. So if I want to delete just one entry, and in this case I want to delete just one of my objects in the array. It's still just an array item though, so that's why this still works, right? So is a method that changes the contents of the array by removing or replacing. Okay, but we just want to remove. So what do we need for the splice to work? Is we need the index. So in this case, right, it wants to splice month, right? So there's month, splice. We want to replace the first, right, which would be March. What is the second parameter there? Oh, delete count. How many do you want to delete? Right? So in this case, it actually was doing an insert because it was just placing it in that item and pushing everything over. But if we wanted to actually delete one, which we would want to do, then we'd have to know its index, right? For us, we'd want to know its index and how many we'd want to delete. So that's pretty easy actually. But the key is, how do we get the index? And where is the index, right? We know we're iterating over these objects, right? Let's go look at the for each for a minute, because there's something on the for each that we have not used, and it's the index. Ooh, index. We need the index to do this simple thing. So how do we get the index on a for each, right? Let's see if they give us an example. Otherwise, I'll just write it and show you what I mean. It's pretty easy. So here's what you'd do. First, you'd come down here, and you can actually do comma index. Now, I'm naming this whatever I want. I'm going to actually name it what it is. Okay? So every time I iterate over this, right, every time I'm going to also have the index. So I could do console.log index, just to have it, just so I can just so we can see it. We'll let this run, right? And now we're here. Now where are we going to see this? As soon as it starts to render. Rio. See, everybody makes coding mistakes. It just happens. Okay. So we should have seen it there. Oh no, actually we should have seen it here when it rendered. Now again, I've had this happen before, and I've had to stop my live server when my breakpoints weren't being activated. Let's see if this is the case today. Because that's inside that event listener. There should be no reason. And this is where sometimes as a new coder, things can get frustrating, because it's like, well, wait a minute, I set that breakpoint. Why aren't you getting it? Yeah, it's still not. All right, hold on. Let me look. Oh, how many of you saw it? I had the breakpoint up here. Some days coding is just easier than others, right? There we go. Whew. So now, as we iterate over, right, we can see the index. So the first time, that first item, which we only have one, would be 0. So how could we use that in to splice to remove an item? Well, we'd need the reference to the array, and we'd need the index. So how do we pass that to here? Well, we have this, right? So can we just do pass the index, which is, by the way, pass by value? We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then what else do we need? We also need the reference to the array. So we pass the index in this, okay, into here. Then here's your challenge, right? Now write the splice. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. I'm going to give you the coding challenge of writing the splice, and then I'll come back and show you. All right, see you in a bit.